Chapter 7. Changes. Fighting in a war changes any soldier, but it especially changed the boys who fought in the Civil War. When they had enlisted, they were naive, undisciplined, and used to doing farm-related chores. Given several months of drilling and experience in battle, these boys had turned into true soldiers. Granted, they would never have the spit and polish to impress anyone while on parade, but their skill in the field had been honed to a killing edge. The fear and confusion that often gripped them in the early fighting gave way to a cooler, more analytical head. In the smoke and roar and chaos of battle, these boys would now hold their lines, obey drum commands, and listen for orders. And when a command was issued, they had learned to follow it even in the face of enemy fire. What follows are several descriptions of later battles that give some idea of what this fighting might have been like. John Delaney and his regiment had been positioned on a slight rise of land near a cornfield when he spotted Union forces moving closer. In the field below us, the enemy are slowly but cautiously approaching, crouching low as they advance behind the undulating tracks in the rich meadows through which they are passing. From the numbers of their flags, which are distinctly visible above the rising ground, we judge them to be at least 2,000 in number. The Confederate artillery opens fire, and this halts the charge for a while. Then the Union cannons return the fire, destroying all of the Confederate cannons and sending the troops into action again. Delaney picks up his story. The Yankees, finding no batteries opposing them, approach closer and closer, cowering down as near to the ground as possible, while we keep up a pretty warm fire by file upon them as they advance. Now they are at the last elevation of rising ground when they rise up and make a charge for our fence. Thomas Galway did not fight against Delaney, but this description of another battle gives a good idea of what such a fight must have been like from his point of view. Forward, we go over fences and through an apple orchard. Now we are close to the enemy. They rise up in the sunken lane and pour deadly fire into us. Our men drop in every few files. The ground on which we are charging has no depression, no shelter of any kind. There is nothing to do but advance or break into a rout. We know there is no support behind us on this side of the creek, so we go forward on the run, heads downward as if under a pelting rain. At this point in the charge, reinforcements arrive to support the Confederate lines, and the gunfire intensifies. Galway and his friends are forced to halt and wait for orders. The fight goes on with unabated fury. The air is alive with the concussion of all sorts of explosions. We are kneeling in the soft grass, and I noticed for a long time that almost every blade of grass is moving. For some time, I supposed that this is caused by the merry crickets, and it is not until I made a remark to that effect to one of our boys near me and notice him laugh, and I know it is bullets that are falling thickly around us. The enemies move some cannons into place and loses a terrible volley of shot and shell. Galway details its effect. Lieutenant Delaney is shot. Lieutenant Lantry, poor fellow, is annihilated instantly near me. The top of his head is taken off by a shell. Our company is narrowing more and more. There is but a small group of us left. Fairchild is bleeding. Campion falls, mortally wounded. Jim Gallagher's head is badly grazed and he rolls, coiled in a lump, down into a ditch. In the opening months of the war, the tendency would have been for one side or the other to pull troops back to safer locations. Better to yield ground than give up lives needlessly. But as the war dragged on, pressure mounted from the citizens and politicians back home for some sort of resolution to the conflict. This pressure was passed along to the commanding officers of both armies, resulting in longer and fiercer battles. At this point in our imagined battle, the Confederate officers see that the Union forces are badly shot up and wavering. This is their chance to strike at the Union line and possibly send it into retreat. Despite their own high casualties, a Confederate charge is ordered, and John Delaney and his fellow soldiers obey instantly. Now we are over the fence, and the line we are to charge is right ahead. Again, we form in a line, and now dashing through a cornfield, The bullets whistle through the leaves and ears and send many a brave comrade to his last account. But we have no time to think. Such is the excitement, such the feeling with which I am inspired, that I rush on with the rest, completely bewildered, and scarcely heeding what takes place around. Just seconds before the Confederate charge is launched, the Union officers realize they will be wiped out if they do not act. Galway relates what happened then. Our ammunition is running low. The order is passed along the line for us to charge. There are no bugles to sound it, but we look at one another, and fixing our bayonets, we raise a cheer and go forward. It is but a hop, skip, and a jump to their lines. Horrible sight. The dead lay piled through this lane, covered with blood. Such close-range, fierce fighting became more and more common, and because soldiers were more skilled than at the war's beginning, the number of deaths increased dramatically. During the first 12 months of the Civil War, a total of 7,000 Union and Confederate soldiers were killed. The next 2 months alone saw a frightening escalation of the fighting, with over 10,000 more soldiers killed. In the end, over 620,000 soldiers, 360,000 Union and 260,000 Confederate, would die, more than the combined total of deaths in all the other wars America has fought in before or since. The boys fighting in the war were surrounded by its carnage. In the Battle of Gettysburg alone, over 7,000 men would die, and another 44,000 would be left wounded or missing in action. Even when not fighting, boys were often confronted by scenes such as this one witnessed by Thomas Galway. We passed over the battlefield of Manassas. The rains of 2 years have uncovered many of the shallow graves. Bony knees, long toes, and grinning skulls are to be seen in all directions. In one place, I saw a man's boot protruding from the grave. The stitches had rotted and the sole of the shoe warped downwards, while the upper had curled upward, leaving the skeleton toes pointing to a land where there is no war. Living every day with so much death and mutilation took a profound emotional toll on these boys. Where it might have stunned them before, made them physically ill, and stirred longings for the safety of home, now they turned off those feelings. They rarely dwelt on encounters with death for long, and instead ignored them in order to get on with other things. Galway ends his journey through the Manassas battlefield with, "Horrid sights are to an old soldier horrid no longer." Toward evening, we bivouacked near Gainesville. It isn't hard to imagine why they acted like this. They had joined the army with friends and neighbors, and through shared experiences, created a new family. But as they were becoming a more unified group, the war was slowly eating away at their numbers. Elisha Stockwell had marched off with 32 others from his town. 2 years later, only 3 of them were still alive. One boy who had taken part in several major battles recalled waking just before the Battle of Antietam. We are aroused early on the 16th by a shell which exploded over the regimental colors, killing Corporal Farmer, the color bearer. A piece of the shell literally cut him in two. But we cooked our breakfast and chatted as usual. Some of the men even gambled. Such descriptions seem distant and cold to us. How could anyone witness such a horrible scene and go on to eat breakfast so casually? It's important to remember that these boys really were skilled soldiers. They knew that the chance to eat a meal might not come along again soon, especially if the battle turned out to be a large one. And they also knew that to think too much about this aspect of war might distract them and make them less precise and poised in battle. Still, a sense of sadness creeps into their writing. They knew that they were no longer the innocent boys who had signed up for a great adventure. Private Henry Graves expressed his confusion in this letter home. "I saw the body of a man killed the previous day this morning, and a horrible sight it was. Such sights do not affect me as they once did. I cannot describe the change, nor do I know when it took effect. Yet I know that there is a change, for I look on the carcass of a man with pretty much such feeling as I would do were it a horse or hog.